Snoop Dogg, the legend of beats and rhymes, was left speechless by a question from a child that shook his world. Dive into a tale where faith meets the rhythm of life. Like, subscribe, and comment to join the journey of a lifetime. Snoop Dogg was visiting a small community center in his neighborhood, often part of his outreach work, but this time he didn't expect to be stopped by a little girl. He smiled, thinking it would be something lighthearted. "Sure," he said, his voice warm without hesitation. The girl, named Ella, asked, "What do you think happens when we die?" Snoop was taken aback. This was not what he expected from a little girl. He tried to hide his surprise, but the question was deep and it made him pause. He looked at her innocent face, wondering how such a young child could have such a serious question. But there was no turning back now. He had to answer. Snoop thought for a moment. He had dealt with music, movies, and cannabis culture, but never a question like this from a child. He had always believed in experiences and the vibe of life, but this question touched something deeper inside him. He looked into Ella's eyes. "That's a very big question," he said slowly. "You know, I don't have all the answers, but here's what I think." He paused again, trying to find the right words. The room felt quieter. The other people in Harmony Hall had stopped talking, now listening in on their conversation. Ella was waiting patiently, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. "You see," Snoop continued, "there are many things in this world that we don't fully understand yet. The vibe of the streets, the rhythm of life. But there are still mysteries we don't have answers for." He shifted his weight, thinking about his next words carefully. Could he answer this question in a way that would make sense? He looked at Ella again, her eyes wide and expectant as though she was waiting for something magical. "Maybe," he said slowly. "We don't really know what happens when we die. But one thing I believe is that the world we live in, this beautiful earth, is full of wonder. And I think in a way that's a part of something bigger." Ella's eyes narrowed a little, trying to understand. She wasn't satisfied with just that answer. There was more on her mind. "Are you saying that when we die, we just go back to being a part of the vibe, the rhythm of life?" she asked, tilting her head. Her voice had a touch of uncertainty, but it was clear that she wasn't done asking. Snoop didn't know how to respond at first. He had never really thought of it that way. The question was too big for him to answer in a simple sentence. He scratched his chin, feeling a weight on his shoulders. He knew the importance of his words. Was he ready for this conversation? He had created music that changed the culture, but this question was different. It wasn't about beats or rhymes. It was about something that touched the soul. "I don't know," Snoop said finally, shaking his head. "But maybe we don't need to know everything right away. Maybe it's okay not to have all the answers." Ella looked at him for a long moment, processing his words. She then spoke again, her voice quieter this time, but with a depth that made Snoop feel something stir inside him. "But what if there is a creator?" she asked softly, her eyes searching his face for an answer. Snoop's heart skipped a beat. Creator? It wasn't a question he expected to be asked, and it made him feel a strange mix of emotions. This little girl had just asked the question that everyone else was too afraid to ask. He took a deep breath. He had been raised in a world of rhythm, of innovation in music, of real-life experiences, but this question was warm and felt like it came from somewhere deep in the heart. "I think," Snoop began, choosing his words carefully, "that everyone believes different things. Some people believe in a creator, others believe in the vibe of the world, and some try to blend both. But no matter what, I think that having faith in something bigger than ourselves can give us hope." Ella's face lit up slightly. She wasn't expecting that answer, but it was enough to make her think. "But what if the creator isn't real?" she asked, almost afraid to ask, her voice trembling. Snoop paused again. This was becoming harder than he thought. Could he give her an answer that would make her feel better? "I don't know if I can answer that for you," he said honestly. "But I think it's okay to ask those questions, and maybe that's the first step to finding the answers you're looking for." Ella sat quietly for a moment, her small hands clasped tightly in her lap. Snoop wondered if he had said the right thing. He could see the wheels turning in her head, but he also saw a hint of sadness in her eyes. "You know, I've always wondered if the creator is real," Ella said, her voice barely above a whisper. But sometimes I'm scared. What if I never find out? Snoop felt his heart ache. He couldn't help but see the fear in her words. It was the same fear that many adults had, the fear of uncertainty, of the unknown. Could he help her find peace? He bent down closer to her, looking into her eyes with warmth and understanding. "It's okay to be scared," he said softly. "But remember, you're never alone. There are people who care about you, and there's always something to believe in, even when you're unsure. It's okay to keep looking for answers." Ella looked up at him, her eyes full of emotion. For a moment, it seemed as though the world had stopped. Then she slowly began to cry. Snoop was taken aback by the tears. He didn't know what to do at first. He wasn't used to seeing children cry, especially after a conversation like this. But he realized that Ella had been holding in a lot of emotions, and his words had touched something deep inside her. He reached out gently, placing a hand on her shoulder. "Hey," he said softly, "it's okay to cry. Sometimes we all need a little release. But remember, you don't have to have all the answers today. You can keep asking questions, and that's what's important." She nodded through her tears, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. The moment felt like it was stretching on forever, but somehow Snoop knew that this was one of the most meaningful moments he had ever experienced. As Ella wiped away her tears, Snoop stood there feeling a strange sense of peace. It was as though the conversation had changed something in him. He wasn't just a man of music and culture anymore. He was a man who had just witnessed the raw, vulnerable side of humanity. "Thank you for asking me that," Snoop said softly. "I may not have all the answers, but you've made me think in ways I never did before." Ella smiled weakly, looking up at him with a new understanding in her eyes. She didn't have all the answers either, but for the first time, she felt okay with that. Snoop turned to walk away, but as he did, he looked back one last time. Ella was still sitting there, lost in thought, but now there was a sense of peace on her face. Sometimes the simplest questions could change everything, and for Snoop, this moment would stay with him forever. The quiet hum of Harmony Hall filled the air as Snoop walked down the hallway. Ella's question echoed in his mind, lingering in a way he hadn't expected. He had answered her as best he could, but somehow it didn't feel like enough. Was it enough? Had he said the right things? He couldn't shake the feeling that he had missed something important. As he made his way toward the exit, he thought about his life, his music, his vision for culture. But in the midst of all that ambition and innovation, had he forgotten something more important? What if Ella was asking for more than just answers? What if she needed reassurance, comfort, and hope? What if we all did? He thought about his childhood, how he had always been the curious one, constantly questioning everything. He had never been afraid to ask why, even when the answers didn't make sense. And yet, when it came to something as profound as life, death, and God, he felt like he was walking in the dark. His mind wandered back to the conversation. He wondered if there was something more to explore there. He had talked about the vibe of life and the universe. But what about faith? Could the vibe of life and faith coexist? The following days passed, and Snoop couldn't shake the memory of Ella's face. It seemed like a small, fleeting moment, but it felt much more significant to him. He began to think about the question she had asked about the Creator, about life after death. For the first time in a long while, Snoop found himself searching for answers, but not the kind of answers he usually sought. This wasn't about music or the future of culture. It was about the bigger picture. He spent evenings reading books about faith, philosophy, and the mysteries of existence. He spoke to friends and colleagues who believed in different things, hoping to understand their perspectives. Each conversation opened new doors, but none of them felt like a full answer. It was like trying to solve a puzzle with pieces that didn't quite fit together. But as time passed, something began to change inside him. He started to see a pattern. Maybe the answer wasn't about having everything figured out. Maybe it was about accepting that there were things beyond human understanding. Maybe it was about learning to live with uncertainty. One night, as he sat on his porch in Sunset Park, listening to the sounds of the night, Snoop felt a strange peace wash over him. Perhaps the answer wasn't as important as the question itself. Perhaps the act of searching for meaning, for truth, was just as valuable as the truth itself. It was several weeks after his encounter with Ella when Snoop found himself at a local gathering in Rhythm City. The event was filled with some of the most influential people in the hip-hop world, discussing everything from music to community impact. But as the night wore on, the conversation shifted toward the nature of life and, surprisingly, faith. As the discussion grew deeper, Snoop remained quiet, listening intently. He had heard arguments from both sides. Some believed in the power of the vibe, while others had a strong belief in a higher power. But there was one person, an elderly woman named Mrs. Grace, sitting across from him, who hadn't spoken yet. Her eyes were kind, and there was a wisdom in her gaze that seemed to hold more knowledge than words could express. Finally, she turned to Snoop and said, "What do you think, Snoop? You've made music that reached the hearts of many, but what do you believe when you listen to the silence of the night?" Snoop hesitated for a moment, surprised by the question. It wasn't just a question about music. It was a question about something much more personal. He thought about Ella and the questions she had asked. He thought about his search for answers. Could he answer her the way he had answered Ella? "I think," he began slowly, "I think life is full of mysteries, and as much as we try to understand everything, there's always something beyond our grasp. Maybe that's the beauty of it. The mystery itself?" Miss Grace nodded thoughtfully. "And do you think that mystery is a sign of something bigger?" Snoop looked up at the sky, deep in thought. "Maybe. I think it's possible that there is something beyond what we can see. Something that connects us all. I don't have all the answers, but I think it's okay not to. Maybe the search itself is what matters." "Ms." Grace smiled warmly, as though she had known the answer all along. "The search is everything," she said softly. "And sometimes it's the questions that bring us closer to understanding." A few months later, Snoop found himself at Harmony Hall again. He had come to check on some community projects, but as he walked through the hallway, he felt something tugging at his heart. He remembered Ella, the one who had asked him about the Creator. He wondered if she was still there. He made his way to the common area, and sure enough, he saw her sitting in the same spot. She was older now, maybe by a year, but she still had that same curious expression. This time, she noticed him right away and stood up, walking toward him with a smile. "Snoop Dogg," she said, her voice filled with excitement. "You came back?" Snoop smiled warmly, crouching down to her level. "I couldn't stay away," he said, his voice gentle. "I've been thinking a lot about our conversation." Ella's eyes lit up. "Really? About what happens when we die?" Snoop nodded. "Yes, and about everything you asked me? I've been searching for answers, but I've realized something important." Ella looked up at him with curiosity. "What did you realize?" "I realized that sometimes it's okay not to have all the answers," Snoop said. "But the search for meaning, the asking of questions, that's what matters most. It's a journey we're all on, and it's one that connects us all." Ella smiled, her face filled with a quiet understanding. Maybe she didn't have all the answers either, but that was okay. She had come to understand that asking the right questions, seeking truth, and keeping an open heart were the most important things. Snoop stood up, looking at her one last time. "Keep asking, okay? Keep searching for what feels right." Ella nodded. "I will. Thank you, Snoop Dogg." And as Snoop turned to leave, he felt a sense of peace that he hadn't felt before. Sometimes, the most profound answers don't come from the answers themselves. They come from the questions we ask and the way we search for truth. From that day forward, Snoop Dogg's perspective on life began to shift. He continued to chase his dreams, to push the boundaries of music and culture, but he also became more open to the mysteries of the world, those that couldn't be explained by the vibe alone. He realized that sometimes faith and curiosity could coexist, and though he didn't have all the answers, he was okay with that. He had learned that the search for meaning was just as important as the destination. As for Ella, she continued to grow, always asking questions, always seeking answers. She knew that life wasn't about having everything figured out. It was about learning, growing, and understanding that the search for truth was a journey that could last a lifetime. And Snoop Dogg knew deep down that, in a way, Ella had given him the answers he needed all along. As Snoop continued his journey of discovery, he found himself sharing his thoughts more openly with others, whether they were colleagues, friends, or strangers in Rhythm City. The questions Ella had asked lingered in his mind, often surfacing in conversations and quiet moments of reflection. He had realized that seeking answers wasn't about finding certainty, but about embracing the unknown with humility and curiosity. In a world so focused on solving problems, perhaps the biggest lesson was to simply keep wondering. One evening, as he listened to the night sounds once more in Sunset Park, he felt an overwhelming sense of connection, not just to the rhythm of the streets, but to the lives he touched, the questions asked, and the answers that could never truly be fully known. In that moment, Snoop understood something profound. No matter how deep into the culture he dove, the search for meaning was a thread that wove them all together across time and space. And sometimes, the most important discoveries didn't happen in the studio or on stage, but in the quiet moments of introspection. Years later, Snoop would often think back to Ella with the big question. He never saw her again, but he carried her words in his heart. Her simple curiosity had sparked a change in him, and in a way, she had shown him the importance of embracing faith alongside his work. She had reminded him that there was more to life than beats, rhymes, and success. It was about connection, belief, and understanding the mysteries that kept us searching. Inspired by his encounter with Ella, Snoop started a new initiative called Questions and Beats, where he would host sessions at Harmony Hall for young people to explore life's big questions through music, dialogue, and community. This program became one of his legacies, not just for the music, but for fostering a space where curiosity and faith could dance together in harmony. Through Questions and Beats, Snoop found a new way to give back, teaching that the beauty of life often lies in the unanswered questions and the shared journey of discovery. Each session was a reminder of that day with Ella, a testament to the power of a single question asked with the innocence and courage of youth.